proceed to the lecture by Alessandro Adamou. He's a digital humanities scientist at the Bibliotheca Hertziana, the Max Planck Institute for Art History, Rome. And his lecture is titled Organizing Knowledge Around Human Engagement with Art and Literature.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I have to say that the previous presentation took quite a load off my shoulders because I will not have to explain things I was afraid I would explain quite poorly. I would like to take you along the journey that I took in order to get an understanding of how to formally model aspects of interaction with art and culture, which are oftentimes not thought of as things you may need to capture, model, and catalog. As it turns out, I have had quite a checkered history when it comes to the application domains of the work I've been doing for the past 16 years now. They do have in common this aspect of having worked on ontology engineering and several aspects of linked data and the application thereof to different domains. But as it often happens, you have to work on whatever page you build. So we've had projects approved on smart cities, learning analytics, open education, content management systems, and I was glad to work on all that. But when the opportunity opened up to investigate the extent to which linked data principles could apply to the remit of digital humanities and cultural heritage, that's where I really felt at ease. Even though it wasn't an easy task per se, I was lucky enough to be involved with a number of projects that had in common modeling several aspects of similar entities that are usually associated to intangibility, to lack of materiality somehow. Now, if we look at how the UNESCO has been classifying intangible heritage over the past 21 years, since they first got an understanding of the need to capture intangible heritage, you would see that there is like a common ground that's bringing many of these aspects of intangible heritage together. And it is the one of being endangered for a variety of reasons, primarily because that culture is not being transmitted in a material form, or maybe through tradition, through oral tradition, or maybe because of political reasons. There is a risk of destruction of culture, iconoclasm. Most aspects have to do with like it's intangible because there is a problem about preserving it, that it might just not be there, even if it were material sometimes. I have come to an understanding, personally working on intangible heritage, that at least 3 dimensions can be taken into consideration when you look at an aspect of immateriality in ICH, so intangible cultural heritage. And this kind of likens it, like I saw something similar in the presentation of the Wright project early on about these 3 possible analyses, and there's something in common with that. I swear it's purely coincidental, but maybe it means it's going in the right direction. We can think of epistemic aspects of immateriality. So what's the knowledge underneath that actually causes an object, an entity, a thought to become culturally relevant? There's an aesthetic aspect, so the fact that you engage with something, with an artwork, with a piece of music, with people, it triggers a response which itself is culturally relevant. For example, you write it down in your diary, and then you become a famous writer, and your diaries become important. And then there is a social aspect. This has been discussed already early on in this study day, and it brings us back to modeling aspects like tradition, folklore, the ways in which culture is transmitted. It can be through different types of cultural contact. And that might include like conflictual ones, so-called permeable ones, or impermeable ones. So the very transmission of culture can be seen as an immaterial cultural object. Now, over a year of study that I was involved with in 2021, I was actually involved in a collaboration between two institutions in Lausanne, so the EPFL and the Université de Lausanne, on trying to make sense of some aspects of immateriality that had to do with Southern Chinese martial arts. And in that regard, actually, we managed to extract epistemic, aesthetic, and social aspects, being, for example, a possible epistemic one being the fact that you name a technique after something you have observed. You name a technique after the praying mantis, or the crane, or a specific action, or an object, like a lock hand techniques that exist in South China martial arts. The kinesthetic aspect as well, which then brings you to defining styles together with the epistemic one, and the social aspect in how these are organized, like how they are transmitted from one culture to another. For example, you might it is a known fact from by scholars at one point that sword-based martial arts in South China start employing single-bladed swords held with two hands, which is like unusual because, double-bladed swords held with both hands, which is unusual because the double-bladed swords comes from the Western Middle Ages mostly, but it's held between two hands in Japanese tradition. And it turns out it happens because at one point the Japanese Ronin were being engaged by the local communities along South China in order to counter pirate incursions. So these aspects could be found in traditional martial arts. I'm not going to discuss so much about it, even though I do appreciate that this falls very much into the remit of what is the topic of the RIDE project. But what I'd really like to talk about is another aspect of immateriality, which is the one of human experience. What is triggered, what happens within, well, the inner self, but also the impact on the environment of whoever watches a movie, looks at an artwork, the painting, hears some music, reads a book. And this kind of brings together aspects of modeling, so things that have to do with ontology, of course, but also phenomenology. Many of these things can ultimately be boiled down to events, we argued in the project I worked on. So you could kind of work or think of it as a phenomenology. So it represents events, responses, perceptions in a linked database knowledge graph framework as similar possible a way as linked data have been used for capturing and cataloging material evidence, which is by far the lion's share of the linked data you can find today in cultural heritage. And then came AAAF, which is a funny success story because for a long time I was loath to admit that the greatest success story of knowledge graphs in the humanities was a set of protocols to exchange images. But then I came to understand why. this was important, specifically in the way the AAAF presentation framework works. Anyway, it is all about how we can treat an experience, what an experience really is. When I first engaged with this, it was within the domain of reading, so the reading experience. In 2013, I joined the Open University in the UK, and I was in the Knowledge Media Institute, which is very well known when it comes to semantic web and knowledge engineering in many aspects, but they had done virtually nothing in digital humanities. Nevertheless, they have had some involvement with the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences of the same university, and before I joined in, they had given some help in modeling the data for their project that they had called the UK Reading Experience Database. It was, to the best of our knowledge, one of the first research projects, and not the first, being crowdsourced specifically for gathering evidence of reading in literature, like people documenting in their letters, diaries, even official papers, the outcomes of having read something. Okay, and it's still going on. Today, it's still gathering data. It had its own data model, and there wasn't quite a conception of linking. Most of the linking you can find is kind of guesswork in that there was some basic heuristics attempting to basically get the names of people and places and construct a DBpedia you write out of them that would be plausibly the DBpedia entity you want to link to. There was no Wikidata then. As it turns out, the underlying data model was actually pretty simple and didn't actually have much thought into how they wanted to represent an experience. An experience was something that it had its own class now in terms of ontology, but it was not specialized or described with any particular features other than involving a reader, the one who would actually read. Now, whether they read aloud or they were in their homes, and that triggers something in them, was not relevant for that project. And of course, it was being captured because there was some evidence, documentation. So the link to documentation was pretty much the cause for that not better modeled item to actually exist. And for one thing, they were not, they were capturing whether the reading was silent, loud, solitary, or in company, but there was basically literals attached to the experience. That was it, really. There I come into the picture, and I need to work on a different project, but also to take on the lessons learned from RED. So I start looking into what ontology exists for representing events. Back at the time, I'm not in any way involved in cultural heritage or digital humanities, so Siloc CRM is one of the many options we go for when it comes to modeling, but it pretty much stands together with opera ontologies like the aforementioned Dolce and a specific event model for the phenomenology of all things. Except the domain in the project that funds me is the one of music. So basically, I have to draw from the previous experience in reading and go in the direction of listening and basically try to create a linked data set, probably a knowledge graph, crowdsourced, so coming from the contribution of a few dozen scholars in the domain of music history, and make it all available to the public. And that was the listening experience database, also still running today, funded over a period of 6 years from 2 grants from the HRC UK, with the goal of, doing, dare I say, a little better that was done with RED, which had its own relational data model, and then there would be an attempt to transform it into linked data. We would go bold back in 2013, but it wasn't an easy thing to do. And we decided to go natively linked data. No relational database, no spreadsheets, nothing to transform into RDF. Go straight in RDF. People were engaged directly with a triple store, and they would have to represent whatever listening experience they get from their materials, their diaries, their newspapers, everything but paid reviews. That was the only one thing that lead wouldn't cover. And it worked pretty well. We managed to have some linking to external sources, Wikipedia again, because Wikidata was only in its infancy. The British National Bibliography from the British Library was also in RDF, and Music Brains had a third-party RDF export for capturing like well-known musical pieces. I will bring all this together using some ontologies that are aligned with the aforementioned FRBR model, like the music ontology, and others that weren't, like UniBo. And it turns out so this is the screenshot of an entry of LED as it appears on the website today. And I believe that in these cases, like Lausanne, Stravinsky, maybe Ernest Ansermet, they're all linked to either Music Brains or Wikipedia, but ultimately the context of an experience is so there is a separation between the performance, so what causes the experience to be modeled, and the experience itself, which ultimately it's still a chunk of text with some context. So the model we built then was partly conscious of modularity. Let's say it was mostly the work of someone who knew more than a little about ontologies and knowledge engineering, but knew next to nothing of sort of CRM and went a completely different way. So the phenomenology of the LED model was only focused to the musical performance. That could very well be a live performance of a band, or mass being told by a priest in a church, or it could be a playback of a record being listening, or even somebody hearing over the radio. We captured all this and we modeled the listening experience specifically as an event, as a subclass of the event ontology, which also I think is aligned with the Dolce framework of events. And by that, basically, we thought of interpreting the experience as an internalized event, something which is processed within the intimate remit of the one who will then document it. But we hadn't thought of a few catches in that. For one thing, what if the person who experiences listening to music is illiterate, and they were not able to note it down in written form, and they had to tell it to someone else? Where does this relationship hold? We didn't capture that. We did associate basically phenomenological nature both to the experience and to the performance as separate things that might have some factors in common. Typically, it might be the case that a live performer will also be the one listening to what they perform, unless the monitors are not working and the audio speakers facing the public, but it won't be the case. So we managed to get a flexible model that allowed us to do a little linking and initial understanding of where we wanted to get in terms of modeling experience. When I left the KMI in 2018 actually, it was the job was picked up by my successor in it. The lead was Enrico Daga. He actually engaged in the project to build something pretty groundbreaking for the time. So a way to actually discover listening experiences from arbitrary text You can go to the LED website today, specifically to the Find LED service, and paste a chunk of text or the URI of a source of text, and it would extract some potential candidates for chunks of text for listening experiences, which you can then, rate and flag whether you agree on them being experiences. It was not done with the large language models or anything like that, no transformer models. It was 2018-19. So it primarily, although it had started as a way of evaluating what are the relevant terms you find in listening experiences, it became a full-fledged NLP tool, but it's basically using like machine learning-based classification using one of the driving algorithms, which is called random forest. It uses entities that are present in the LED knowledge graph that resulted from my work. And when they actually evaluated on a gold standard of about 1,000 samples from 17 sources, that were actual sources of LED and UK red, it led to acceptable precision recall trade-offs in terms of F1 scores, but it was noted then that the way we had shaped the model of experiences in LED wasn't really contributing to the discovery of listening experiences as it would have if they had adopted the model of UK red. It wasn't quite different. So we kind of brought it back to the drawing board, and by then I was in Ireland at the Insight Centre in Galway, but still involved with digital humanities. So, and the new project was again focusing on the reading experience. The Read It or Read IT, and I was never sure how to pronounce it properly. It was a 3-year project funded by the German Program Initiative, specifically on cultural heritage. That was actually meant to capture and annotate experiences of engaging with texts throughout European literature and art, but it was no longer just about focusing on the reader or on the listener alone. It actually had to take into account what we had neglected earlier, that included like telling your experience to someone who could actually write it down. And it was predicated upon the assumption that it would use as much as possible CRM and FRBR, namely the ontologized version of FRBR called FRBR-OO, object-oriented. So the model, the initial model of the Read IT project actually did constitute of singling out different aspects from the text that together form a listening experience. And of course, there's what is being read and who's reading it. Yes, of course, that's important. But also the nature not only of the content itself, so the text, but suppose, for example, that the text is a barred book which already had some annotation, marginalia, and other maybe alterations to the book that would have altered the perception of the reader. Maybe it would have focused the reader towards what was being annotated in the marginalia or not. And then this was produce an alteration in the state of mind of a person. So already two different aspects to consider in the experience. So the reading process, which would be the engagement with the performance, if you were to bring it in the context of listening. There is, of course, the event itself, the performance, or the act of reading, and the state of mind, an alteration to which is triggered by the process. And that led to an extremely baroque model at this point. We sat down and tried to capture as many aspects as possible of what would be the most complete way to ontologize a reading experience, so considering aspects of the content, of the medium, but formalizing how there can be types of alterations, like annotations, damage, pages being torn, of the disposition that the reader had, where they paid to write a review about that book or that article. Were they rereading that book for personal reasons, maybe because their knowledge had changed since? And what were the conditions of reading? What did feedback from other alterations in the states of mind of other people involved in reading produce an outcome into it? So whilst this framework did accommodate and kind of fill the gaps that we had located in the LED model, effectively we realized that maybe a certain degree of generalization could and probably should be performed. And what is that brings in common, like, the relationship between a performance and what is triggered in terms of the experience? Well, the fact that there is an aesthetic engagement. You're reading a book, you're watching a movie, you're engaging with art in an aesthetically relevant way. So we thought, let's take this extremely complicated model and perform an abstraction over it that might be helpful for one thing with the previous listening experience project, and then maybe for other types of engagement. And as most of you teach me, because University of Bologna is at the forefront of ontology pattern and pattern-based design, we actually brought this back and decided to design not so much of an ontology, but a knowledge pattern, a design pattern, whereupon ontologies will be based. And in that case, we actually developed a minimalistic model, again this time, that separated different aspects of the human experience. But the experience itself is no longer there. You do not see like a box representing an entity, like a type of entity or class, which itself denotes the experience. Rather, it's the combined involvement of at least 4 of these different entities. So there is, of course, an activity, the activity performed, which can be either the performance, the act of reading, and also the activity that the one who will have the experience performs, and the engagement of a person in activity is pretty much what contains aspects such as the disposition. So they have a disposition, they engage with something, and that produces an observation. Here you have to think of the observation as you would think of it in statistics, as you would see a statistical observation, which effectively is like a set of values observed, you would see. That is how we thought of it, and of course the reason why this is produced, whether it's spontaneous, it's solicited, or for whatever other reason, or it's maybe completely irrational, that would be the prompting. So we took this high-level model, and again, as it is known in pattern-based knowledge modeling sciences, this university, you are not supposed, when you're making an ontology based on a pattern, you are not supposed to use the pattern directly and just attach things to it. What you should effectively do is gently lower the patterns you developed into the ontology you're making, for example, by renaming things, changing their identifying URIs to be within the domain of the ontology you're building. Don't reuse the one of the pattern. And this resulted in a model which we incidentally called CEO. It's got nothing to do with the corporate world. It actually stands for crowdsourcing experience ontology. And in that case, basically, again, the key elements of the pattern, like the prompting, the engagement, they're still there. The observation is also there. But then, of course, you specialize the activities involved, and there can be tasks, there can be crowdsourcing campaigns. LED was populated, we had 11,000 experiences, mostly coming from specific crowdsourcing campaigns, and then the agent involved. Now, the Read It project was one I co-wrote the funding bid for, but by the time it was funded, I moved on to an institution that was not involved and couldn't be involved for political reasons in Read IT. So basically, I kind of took a back seat and did help out in modeling what we've seen so far. But when it came to actually implementing it, it wasn't my job to do. It was the job of my successor at KMI, Alessio Antonini. And what they did basically, after implementing the experience and observation pattern into the crowdsourcing ontology, alongside that complex reading experience ontology, they then employed them as the base drivers for the data used by real-world applications utilized to actually run the campaign of gathering data and information about reading experiences. One was, and I think still is, the Tell Me What You're Reading bot. That is a chatbot on Telegram, which is still working. That was actually implemented on top of the crowdsourcing ontology system to actually gather data. But along that, they also had a more traditional system of giving out postcards that you could fill in with your text describing your personal experience. So no longer just the one found in literature, but even your own. And you could do that either by going to the online version of the postcard or by the QR code, but there have been cases where it was necessary to fill in physical postcards. One such case is, well, it was during workshops, engagement with students. That was where it was quickly done on paper, but it was also a relational run on reading experiences in a place where people tend to have time to read, but not the ability to use a phone. That's the prison. A campaign was actually run in a prison to gather this kind of information. But even after that, later on I moved from the Insight Center in Ireland to the Bibliotheca Hertziana, and it turns out the Bibliotheca Hertziana is not literally a library, rather it is a research institute in art history that has a library, a very well-furnished physical library, but also a just as well-furnished photographical archive. So we figured, okay, we've engaged with literature, we've engaged with music, but we need to start looking into aspects of engaging with art. Later last year, again in collaboration with the University of Lausanne, we undertook a pilot project which is intended to evolve into something bigger. Originally aimed at trying to assess how well the icon classification system for images is suited for encoding information about emotions. Emotions that not just the art historian, but anyone, the layperson, can detect in a piece of art when they see one. So we took about 300 photos from the Hertziana phototheque, specifically depicting scenes from Greek classics, and gave them a vocabulary of 24 terms denoting emotions, like anger, anxiety, delight, fear, rage, and asked them to annotate regions of images using those terms. We didn't tell them what the image was, what scene it was, what episode from the Trojan War it was, or even what icon class it had been annotated with. We just let them go with the flow. And they were not art historians. There were students in computer science and digital humanities, but coming from the computer science domain or the linguistics domain. And the interpretations, if you want, the hermeneutic act here, turn out to be pretty different. And whilst we used it then for that study to assess that icon class either should be used better or is just not enough to encode emotional features in art, it was still helpful for us to understand that the job that we are giving to these 20 students was actually for them to engage in an aesthetic act. What they were doing through the platform where they were annotating the images with their regions was in fact another way of giving information about their personal experiences of engaging with a piece of art. Only the use case then was different, so we captured those data in a different way rather than representing them according to the But we might do it in the future, if anything, because, well, some scenes in the Greek myth, especially the Trojan War myth, are not exactly unambiguous in terms of what emotions they should evoke. Of course, whereas if you have a depiction of the Laocoon being strangled by the serpents, or the Rape of Persephone, or Menelaus dragging the body of Patroclus, well, there the tragic element is rather clear, and indeed there was no much ambiguity in the evaluation. But when you look at things like the Judgment of Paris or human sacrifices, the story changes a lot. And depending on whether the artist or the viewer engaged on some details of a scene of a human sacrifice, the experience changes dramatically. If someone has a disposition to focus on the sacrificial victim, maybe because they have something to share with the victim, of course, they will primarily detect certain emotions from the victim's side. But a human sacrifice is usually something that is performed in order to improve something. Iphigenia was sacrificed so that the Greeks could enter Troy. So it is no surprise, it comes to no surprise that some of the students actually annotated those images with delight, joy, because it was the joy and delight of the other people present for whom it actually meant something good was going to happen. So this is actually where we want to go in regard to covering the iconological hermeneutic aspect from the point of view of how to encode this in the human experience. And before I conclude, although this is quite different from the presentation we had in the morning concerning how to use ResearchSpace and virtual research environments at large, I still would like to share actually a few thoughts about how we went implementing this with the actual framework. At the time of the LED project, building a toolkit that could do natively linked data was no easy feat. What we did in terms of LED, we actually took a vanilla content management system. We took Drupal. Back in the day, I don't think we even had the Whiskey system, which is the ultimate in Drupal. We paid a triple store with it, so Gina Fuseki, but also we needed a way to reference other data sets. We need to reference DBpedia, MusicBrainz, and all that. Some of them had Sparkle endpoints, some of them didn't, and some did have Sparkle endpoints, but if we had engaged with them at the pace of which was required by the project, they would have banned us. So what we did was actually create large search indices in Solr and serve them using a platform called Apache Stamble that I was involved with back in the day that was specifically for supporting content management system with semantic features. And in our cases, we were using it for some NLP, because people were entering all sorts of data for the locations, and we needed to extract the actual places from them, and also a recommender system for external entities. And then we would have all the data sets underneath. Now, much of what needed to be done in the pipeline for this to work is actually available by and large in a system like ResearchSpace. You know, actually having a system to curate the whole CRUD, so create, read, update, and delete aspects of linked data entities is available there, but also ability to work together with third-party linked data sets and also non-linked data sets, as we had it in the case of at least one of the VIAF, which then didn't have Sparkle. And you know, we had to implement the whole map interface by ourselves, and the fact that, you know, if we had something like ResearchSpace today, much of our work would have been eased. You know, we would have gotten like geospatial visualization for free. We would have had timeline visualization with little effort, and smart facets, or depending on the nature of the data we're working with, already available. What we didn't have then, what was not available even in later in ResearchSpace instances, but it is available now, is a way of exploring a data set in a way that is really dynamic. As you can see this in this graph view, it's not a static graph where you run a query, you get those data, you print the nodes, they're connected, and that's that. That's the standard ResearchSpace. A fork of ResearchSpace actually has a React application developed by University of Zurich, primarily, to my understanding, which actually embodies another visualization component which is able to perform query expansion. So actually to encourage serendipitous discovery of data, you click on a node, another query is performed at the back, the node expands itself. And this is something that, you know, brought together, including all the ways to obtain analytics and infographics available in a system like this. Actually, I have to observe it makes like the native management of linked data sets in a cultural domain much easier than it was 10, 11 years ago. So what we understood here is that if you want to actually understand how to detect evidence of experience, something more is necessary than just finding out who the actors involved are. And by actors, I don't just mean the people, but also what is being engaged with and all that. Linked data helped a lot, but there has been, and there still is, a significant cognitive effort, and maybe a hermeneutic effort needed to generalize this and apply it even to future projects. Whether then doing what we have been doing for art, or doing like emotion mining, as we would do for mining critique, possibly from reviews or from, you know, from tweets, posts on X. So I have to say this today. So, will we be able to extrapolate aesthetic acts from these, and is it still enough for a model about experience to focus on the model of the responses of engaging with something? That will depend basically on what funds the next project that will be involved with that uses this, or maybe the outcome of the one about to be classics. But we'll see where it goes. In the meantime, here is the literature that I cited for this presentation. Some is work that I've been involved with, some of my predecessors, some of my successors. But all in all, there's decent reads. And speaking of predecessors and successors, there is a whole group of people that I'd like to thank. These are but only a subset of the leads of the various projects that have been involved with this. But without them, probably I will still be modeling things the way I was doing it in lead, which was close but not quite. Thank you very much.
That's maybe not directly related, but I think it is somehow. When I think about experience, reading experience, listening to music, anything, I'm thinking about feeling emotions, and from my perspective, emotions are not a concrete thing, it's rather an approximation. So what are your thoughts about when we are thinking about modeling and everything? What are your thoughts about modeling approximation? Like, because sometimes I can feel something that is not concrete, or maybe mixed feelings, or I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Okay, for one thing, specifically when it comes to emotion, the vocabulary used for the terms denoting emotions is something we didn't create, we borrowed it. It actually comes from a project called SemanticNet. And it's the brainchild of linguists. We only used it as as a way for users to annotate stuff with. But we didn't, for reasons similar to the ones you said, we didn't use them directly as indicators of the response actually being triggered. And because it's an approximation, if I were to actually involve those like 24 terms in a system where I know that it's only a vague approximation, I would not have direct links to them. What you can do in terms of knowledge modeling, knowledge engineering is actually create entities that, they are instances of things that are intentionally defined. Intention as opposed to extension, not coming from the intent. And basically, that is a way that you define a category which might be the one that you approximate to with an emotion, by the fact alone that, okay, this is the category of all responses that involve a certain degree of anxiety. You do that, rather than pointing direct anxiety. And then you instantiate it specifically for the engagement you had with that work. That would be one non-committal but safe way that I would model it.
Thank you very much. Others? Yeah.
I appreciated very much your presentation, and in particular the final conclusions. And I'm wondering if the title of this seminar is Revealing Connections. Is it the problem of revealing, formalizing, representing, discovering, maybe? It is not. The problem is that we have a sentiment of the connections, but we are not yet able to represent them in the digital world. Is this what you meant with your final?
Well, I'm going to say the engagement I had with the projects where I worked on specifically on this, they had to deal with discovering, yes, and with structuring. Revealing the connections itself was something in which we were involved only insofar as we wanted to basically realize what I had posed in the question to Dominic Altman early this morning. When I asked him, I have the problem working with art historians that they see everything in terms of cards. Everything is a scheda very often, and they would only see connections upon scrutinizing two or more scheda, and only then that would crop up. Whenever we gave them revealed connections, so actually the output of inferencing, to make them understand, look, this church and this museum are related because some artifacts were moved from the church and they were preserved in the museum, that is important. They were not picking it up in a context where they were still seeing things as entries, as scheda, and not as a knowledge map, the way Dominic showed it up. In hindsight, LED was pretty much like that. LED, the listening one, was still organized in these terms, and we cracked a little ground in terms of showing to them how the connections are revealed, but that only worked because of the commonalities they had in terms of the factors involved that could be found in link data. So, for example, a musician writing about their own experience of having played something that happened. It did help that an actor was maybe present in Wikipedia, that the piece of music was present in Music Brains. That did help the music historians of the project understand how some connections were cropping up. But it did not help them when my successor later on tried to use the Finder tool to make other commonalities emerge, such as similar engagements. But in our defense, it also claimed that this was primarily because the model then was not good enough. So I believe actually a better model would have and will be able to make these emerge, if that answers.
Okay, thank you very much, Alessandro. I think that if there are no questions, we can go ahead with our next and concluding lecture of the day. So thank you again.